Martha Dixon was lighting the candles for an anniversary dinner Nolan had already forgotten when the accountant's envelope slipped from her trembling hands onto the marble kitchen floor. 1 tax return, 2 home addresses, 1 husband, 2 families. At first, her brain refused to understand what her eyes were seeing. Then a photograph slid halfway out of the second file. Nolan stood on a beach she had never visited, holding 2 laughing children she had never seen, while a blonde woman kissed his cheek like she'd been doing it for years. Outside rain hammered against the giant windows of the house Martha helped build. Inside, 20 years of marriage collapsed in complete silence. And the worst part? The same accountant handled both families. If you think betrayal always starts with obvious lies, this story might change your mind. Stay with Martha until the end, because Nolan Dixon made one mistake that destroyed the perfect double life he thought he could control forever. People envied Martha Dixon's life. From the outside, it looked effortless. The 6-bedroom house in North Shore, Chicago, with floor-to-ceiling windows, the black Range Rover with custom leather interiors, the holiday charity galas, the elegant dinners, the husband whose face appeared in business magazines beside headlines about leadership expansion and corporate brilliance. Nolan Dixon had mastered the art of looking devoted, especially in photographs. Martha used to believe those photographs meant something. Now, sitting alone at the kitchen island with the second tax file still open beside her, she realized something terrifying. A camera could capture a smile without capturing the truth behind it. Her eyes drifted again toward the beach photograph. Nolan stood barefoot in the sand, wearing a white linen shirt she bought him last summer. One little girl sat on his shoulders while a boy clung to his side. Rebecca Hayes leaned against him naturally, like a woman who slept beside him every night. Not a mistress, not a fling, a family. Martha pressed a shaking hand against her mouth. "No," she whispered weakly. "No, no, no." But denial had already started dying, because suddenly everything made sense. The business trips, the second phone, the late-night conference calls taken outside, the emotional distance, the way Nolan had stopped looking at her years ago. The house felt enormous around her now, cold, empty, like a museum dedicated to a marriage that had already died while she kept watering the flowers. Her phone buzzed suddenly. "Nolan!" Martha stared at the screen while her heartbeat slammed against her ribs. For one irrational second, she almost answered normally. Almost asked him if he wanted red wine or whiskey with dinner. Almost pretended she hadn't just discovered another woman had been living half her life beside hers. Instead, she let it ring. A text followed immediately. "Running late? Big client dinner. Don't wait up." Martha laughed. Actually laughed. A broken, horrified sound that echoed through the kitchen. "Client dinner," she whispered. Meanwhile, somewhere across the city, another woman was probably setting a table for him too. The thought nearly split her open. 22 years. 22 years of loyalty, of building him, of defending him, of shrinking herself so Nolan could become bigger, and somehow she still wasn't enough. Tears blurred her vision again, but another memory surfaced before she could collapse completely. Nolan at 28, young, exhausted, ambitious, standing in their tiny first apartment wearing a cheap suit and apologizing because he couldn't afford to take her to dinner for their anniversary. Back then, he used to look at her like she mattered. "You believe in me more than I believe in myself," he had told her once. And Martha had? God, she had. She remembered cashing part of her inheritance after her father died to help Nolan launch his consulting firm. She remembered working freelance interior design jobs late into the night while Nolan built connections. She remembered skipping vacations, delaying dreams, smiling through loneliness because she believed sacrifice was what love looked like. At some point, Nolan stopped seeing those sacrifices. He started seeing them as obligations, expected, normal. Martha wiped her tears angrily. No, not tonight. Tonight she needed facts, not feelings. Her eyes drifted toward Nolan's home office upstairs, the second phone. For years, Nolan guarded it carefully. It's company property, he always said casually whenever she asked. Confidential client information. And Martha, because she trusted him, had accepted the explanation. Now trust felt like stupidity wrapped in silk. Slowly, Martha stood. Her legs felt unstable beneath her as she walked through the silent house and climbed the staircase. Every framed family photograph along the hallway suddenly looked fake. Every vacation smile, every Christmas portrait, every anniversary post online, a performance. Nolan's office smelled like cedarwood and expensive cologne. Everything sat perfectly organized because Nolan hated disorder. The second phone rested inside the top desk drawer. Locked. Of course. Martha stared at it for several seconds. Then another memory surfaced. Nolan entering his passcode at dinner 2 weeks earlier. Their wedding anniversary, September 14th. Her fingers trembled as she typed the numbers. The screen unlocked instantly. Her stomach dropped. That hurt more than she expected, because it meant she still mattered enough to be his password, but not enough to be his only wife. The messages loaded slowly, and then everything shattered completely. Rebecca. Martha physically recoiled. There were thousands of messages, pictures, voice notes, videos, an entire hidden life stored inside 6 inches of black glass. Martha opened one photo after another, mechanically, like her body had disconnected from her soul. Nolan teaching the little boy to ride a bicycle. Nolan asleep on a couch with the little girl curled against his chest. Nolan kissing Rebecca in front of a Christmas tree. Nolan carving pumpkins. Nolan smiling, really smiling, not the cold corporate smile he gave Martha lately. This smile looked warm, human, loved. Something hot and ugly twisted inside her chest. Jealousy, not of Rebecca, of the version of Nolan she thought no longer existed. The voice memo notification appeared next. Martha hesitated before pressing play. Rebecca's voice filled the office softly. "The kids miss you, babe. Ethan cried again after you left. He keeps asking when you're coming home for good." Martha stopped breathing. Ethan. The little boy had his name. Then Rebecca laughed quietly in the recording. "And honestly, I miss you too. I know the Martha situation is complicated, but you promised we're almost there." Martha's blood turned cold. The Martha situation. Not wife, not marriage, situation. Nolan had reduced 22 years of her life into an inconvenience. The recording continued. "I just want us to finally be a real family." Martha ended the audio abruptly. Silence crashed around her. For several seconds, she simply sat there staring at nothing. Then another message caught her attention. "Sent from Nolan 2 nights ago. Can't stay long tonight. Martha's getting suspicious." Martha closed her eyes slowly. Something inside her cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically. Quietly. Like ice breaking beneath someone standing too long in the cold. All these years she had blamed herself for the distance. Maybe she was too emotional, too needy, too sensitive, too difficult. That was Nolan's favorite word lately. Difficult. Meanwhile, he had been dividing himself between 2 homes like a man managing investment properties. Martha suddenly noticed another folder on the phone. Expenses. Inside were spreadsheets, apartment payments, private school tuition, vacation bookings, jewelry receipts, all funded through accounts she recognized, joint accounts. Her inheritance money, her father's money. Martha felt nausea rise violently in her throat. He hadn't just betrayed her emotionally, he had used her. financed another life with the ruins of hers. Downstairs, thunder rattled the windows. Martha stood slowly and walked toward the office mirror. For a long moment, she barely recognized the woman staring back. 46 years old, beautiful still, but exhausted, lonely, invisible. A woman who spent so long trying to be chosen that she forgot to choose herself. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from Nolan. "You asleep?" Martha stared at the message. Then she looked back at her reflection. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel heartbreak alone. She felt anger, cold, focused, dangerous anger, the kind that arrives after grief burns itself empty. Slowly, Martha typed back, "No, waiting for you." Then she placed the phone down carefully and whispered to her reflection, "You have no idea what you just lost." Martha barely slept. Not because she cried. That part had already happened somewhere between midnight and 3 in the morning, curled silently on the bathroom floor while Nolan showered downstairs, pretending nothing in their lives had changed, because to him, nothing had. That was the cruelest part. Nolan had walked into the house at almost 1 in the morning, carrying takeout containers and smelling faintly of cedar cologne and winter air. He kissed Martha's forehead casually when he saw her sitting in the living room. "You should have gone to bed," he said smoothly, like he hadn't spent the evening with another woman, like he hadn't tucked another child into bed before driving home to her. Martha looked at him carefully then. Really looked at him, at the silver strands beginning to appear near his temples, at the expensive watch she bought him 5 Christmases ago, at the familiar hands now capable of destroying people without trembling. And suddenly she understood something terrifying. Monsters rarely looked like monsters. Sometimes they looked like successful husbands with soft voices and perfect teeth. "I wasn't tired," Martha answered quietly. Nolan loosened his tie. "You okay?" The irony almost made her laugh. She wondered if he practiced concern in mirrors. "I'm fine." "Good." He nodded distractedly. "Big week coming up." Then he disappeared upstairs. Just like that. No guilt, no suspicion, no idea that his entire secret life had already collapsed inside her hands. Martha stayed awake long after he fell asleep beside her. She listened to his breathing in the dark and realized she no longer recognized the man lying inches away. At 5:30 in the morning, she got out of bed quietly, and by 7:15 she was driving downtown toward the second address. The entire city looked gray beneath the heavy Chicago clouds. Traffic blurred around her while anxiety tightened painfully in her chest. She almost turned around 3 separate times. At one stoplight, she gripped the steering wheel so hard her knuckles turned white. What if she was misunderstanding everything? What if Rebecca knew? What if the children belonged to someone else? What if no? Martha stopped herself. Women like her spent entire marriages explaining away obvious betrayals because the truth felt too catastrophic to survive. But survival and denial were not the same thing. The luxury apartment building stood near Lakeshore East, sleek and modern, with enormous glass windows overlooking the water. Martha parked across the street with trembling hands. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't cheap motel cheating. This was a real life, a carefully maintained life. Nolan had built another home. For nearly 40 minutes, Martha sat motionless inside the car while people moved around the city outside her windshield. Young professionals carrying coffee cups, dog walkers, mothers pushing strollers. Ordinary life continuing while hers quietly burned to the ground. Then she saw him. Nolan. Her breath caught immediately. He stepped out of a black SUV wearing jeans and a charcoal sweater Martha had folded herself 3 days earlier. Grocery bags hung from his hands as he laughed at something on his phone. Laughed. Not the polite corporate laugh she heard at business dinners. This one sounded effortless. Real. Martha's stomach twisted violently. He looked younger here somehow, lighter, as if the burden in his life had never been maintaining two families. The burden had been hiding one. A few seconds later, the apartment doors opened again. A blonde woman stepped outside, holding the hand of a little girl in a yellow raincoat. Rebecca Hayes. She looked younger than Martha expected. Maybe late 30s, beautiful in an understated way, soft features, tired eyes, no heavy makeup. The kind of woman people trusted immediately. The little girl squealed "Daddy" before Martha could even breathe. The child ran straight into Nolan's arms. And Nolan dropped the groceries instantly and lifted her effortlessly, laughing while kissing her cheek. "I missed you too, Peanut." Martha physically recoiled, because she had spent years begging that man to sound alive around her again. Now she was watching him give another family the version of himself she thought had disappeared forever. A little boy came rushing outside next. "Did you get the dinosaur cereal?" Nolan grinned. "Top shelf, like always." The boy cheered. Rebecca walked closer, smiling warmly at Nolan before kissing him casually, naturally, intimately, not like a mistress, like a wife. Martha felt something crack inside her chest so sharply she almost gasped aloud. She watched Nolan carry groceries while the children clung to him, watched Rebecca brush rainwater from his shoulder affectionately, watched all four of them disappear into the building together. A family. A complete family. And somehow unbelievably Martha was the outsider now. Tears blurred her vision again, but she forced herself to breathe. She needed clarity, not collapse. 20 minutes later, Nolan reappeared alone, carrying trash bags toward the alley dumpster beside the building. Martha's pulse skyrocketed. This was her chance. Before she could overthink it, she got out of the car. Nolan. He froze instantly. The trash bag slipped slightly from his hand as he turned around. For one single second, pure terror crossed his face. Not guilt. Fear. Because liars only panic when their realities collide. "Martha." His voice sounded strangled. "What are you doing here?" Martha folded her arms tightly to stop herself from shaking. "I could ask you the same thing." Silence. Heavy, dangerous silence. Nolan recovered quickly, though. He always did. "It's not what you think." Martha almost smiled at how pathetic that sentence sounded now. "Really?" she asked softly. "Because it looks exactly like what I think." His jaw tightened. "Martha, lower your voice." The audacity stunned her. Not an apology, not concern, image management, always image management. "You have children," she whispered. Nolan glanced toward the building nervously. "This isn't the place." 22 years, Martha continued, ignoring him. "You looked me in the eye for 22 years. It's complicated." "No!" she snapped suddenly. "Complicated is forgetting an anniversary. Complicated is marriage counseling." Her voice cracked. "This is psychotic." Nolan stepped closer quickly. "Keep your voice down." Martha stared at him in disbelief. "You're worried about volume. You don't understand the situation. Then explain it." His face hardened slightly then. And there it was, the Nolan she knew best. Cold, defensive, irritated she was making his life inconvenient. Rebecca suddenly appeared near the entrance again. The moment she saw Martha, confusion crossed her face. "Nolan." He turned immediately, and something horrifying happened. His entire demeanor changed, softened, warm again. "I'll be inside in a minute," he told Rebecca gently. Martha felt physically sick watching the transformation. Rebecca looked between them uncertainly. "Everything okay?" Nolan answered too quickly. "Yeah, just work stuff. Work stuff. Martha almost laughed hysterically. Rebecca hesitated before nodding slowly and taking the children back inside. But not before the little girl waved at Nolan through the glass doors. "Bye, Daddy, Daddy!" The word echoed violently inside Martha's head. When the doors closed again, Nolan finally looked back at her. "She thinks we're separated," he admitted quietly. Martha stared at him. "What?" Nolan rubbed his forehead. "Rebecca thinks the divorce is almost finalized." The ground beneath Martha seemed to disappear. "You told her we're divorcing. She wouldn't have stayed otherwise." The honesty of that statement horrified her more than another lie would have. "You built an entire relationship on a fake future." Nolan exhaled impatiently. "I was trying to handle things carefully." Carefully, Martha whispered. "You gave another woman children while sleeping beside me every night." His face darkened slightly. "I didn't plan this." "No," Martha said bitterly. "You planned it perfectly." For the first time, Nolan looked angry instead of controlled. "You think marriage to you has been easy?" Martha blinked slowly. There it was. Blame. Of course. Men like Nolan always rewrote history to justify betrayal. "I supported you through everything," Martha said quietly, "and I appreciated that." Past tense. Martha noticed it immediately. Appreciated. Like loyalty was a service already completed. Like she had expired. A cold wind swept through the alley. Martha suddenly realized something terrifying. This man did not love either version of his life. He loved being worshipped inside both of them. And for the first time since opening that envelope, Martha stopped feeling merely heartbroken. Now she felt dangerous. Very, very dangerous. 3 days after discovering Nolan's second family, Martha sat at the far end of the Dixon dining table wearing a cream silk dress and diamond earrings that suddenly felt like handcuffs. The table looked perfect. Crystal glasses, white roses, gold candlelight flickering across polished silverware, the kind of dinner that appeared in lifestyle magazines under headlines like "Elegant Modern Family Hosting." Martha wanted to laugh every time someone complimented the marriage. Nolan sat beside her, effortlessly charming, one hand resting casually against the back of her chair like he still had the right to touch her. Across the table, Nolan Dixon sipped red wine while silently examining Martha the way wealthy women examined furniture they regretted purchasing. Judgment wrapped in pearls. Martha had spent 22 years trying to earn Diane's approval. Tonight, for the first time, she realized Diane enjoyed withholding it. "Your hydrangeas finally survived the weather this year," Diane commented lightly while cutting into her filet mignon. Martha nodded politely. "I changed landscapers." Diane dabbed her lips carefully. Good choice. The last ones lacked discipline. Everything with Diane sounded like criticism disguised as sophistication. Nolan's younger brother Grant chuckled softly into his whiskey, while Nolan continued discussing business expansion with 2 investors seated near the end of the table. Martha listened quietly, observed quietly. That was new. Usually she filled uncomfortable silences, smoothed tension, protected Nolan socially. Tonight she simply watched. And once she started watching, she noticed everything. Nolan checking his phone beneath the table every few minutes, the tiny smile he suppressed reading certain messages, the emotional energy he gave strangers while offering Martha almost nothing. How easy deception had become for him. "So Martha," Diane said, suddenly pulling attention toward her, "are you still doing those little decorating projects? Not the interior design business Martha once built before sacrificing most of her clients for Nolan's schedule." Martha swallowed calmly. "Sometimes." Diane smiled thinly. "Well, it's wonderful you stay busy." Translation. "At least you contribute some." Before Martha could respond, Nolan laughed lightly. To be fair, Martha loses interest in projects pretty quickly. Several people chuckled politely. Martha felt heat creep slowly up her spine. Not because the comment hurt, because it was calculated. Nolan loved humiliating her in ways subtle enough to look harmless publicly. Tiny cuts, tiny embarrassments, tiny reminders that he controlled the narrative. And suddenly Martha realized something painful. He had probably been practicing emotional cruelty on her for years to justify betraying her in his own mind. If she was difficult enough, then he could pretend he wasn't a monster. Investor number 1 leaned toward Martha kindly. Nolan says you practically built his company in the early years. Before she could answer, Nolan interrupted casually. She helped emotionally. Emotionally. Martha stared at him. Not financially, not professionally, not through sleepless nights and dead parents and sacrificed careers and inheritance money emotionally. Like she had simply lit candles and cheered from the sidelines. A strange calm spread through Martha then, because the betrayal was becoming clearer now. Nolan wasn't just hiding another family, he was rewriting her entire existence. Diane sighed dramatically while adjusting her diamond bracelet. It's unfortunate Martha never had children, she said. Silence hit the table instantly. Grant looked uncomfortable. One investor suddenly became fascinated with his wine glass. Martha felt the familiar stab in her chest. For years, Diane weaponized that wound whenever she wanted control. The fertility treatments, the miscarriages, the grief. All of it quietly turned into proof that Martha had somehow failed womanhood itself. Nolan took a sip of whiskey and said nothing, not one word defending her. That hurt more than Diane's cruelty ever could. Diane continued smoothly. Children give a marriage purpose, stability. Martha looked at Nolan slowly. How many times had he sat through conversations like this knowing he already had children somewhere else? How many times had he watched her blame herself while hiding the truth? A sudden memory surfaced. 3 years ago, Martha crying in their bathroom after another failed fertility consultation. Nolan holding her while whispering, "It's okay. We're enough." Liar! The word echoed violently inside her head. You know, Diane added carelessly, men need legacy. Martha almost laughed. Legacy Nolan had created an entire secret bloodline downtown while pretending infertility broke his heart too. The cruelty of it was almost cinematic. Martha. She blinked. One of the investors smiled awkwardly. You okay? Yes, Martha answered softly. Just tired. Nolan's eyes flicked toward her briefly. Sharp, assessing. For the first time since their confrontation outside Rebecca's apartment, Martha sensed unease in him. Not guilt, suspicion. Because she wasn't reacting normally anymore. She wasn't crying, wasn't pleading, wasn't asking questions. Women became dangerous the moment they stopped begging for explanations. Dinner continued. Conversations blurred together into stock market discussions and vacation plans and political gossip while Martha drifted emotionally further away from the room. At one point, Nolan's phone vibrated again. Martha saw the screen light up beside his plate. Rebecca. His hand moved instantly to hide it. Too late. Their eyes met. A pulse of tension shot through the air between them. Nolan stood abruptly. Excuse me 1 second. He walked toward the terrace doors carrying the phone. Martha watched him through the glass as he answered. And then that smile again. Soft, warm, real. The smile he no longer gave her. Diane noticed Martha staring. Honestly, Diane sighed quietly. I don't know why you look so miserable all the time lately. Martha turned slowly. Diane lowered her wine glass carefully. A man like Nolan carries enormous pressure. Men need peace when they come home. There it was, the old philosophy. Women exist to absorb damage quietly. Martha studied Diane carefully. Had she always been this cruel? Or had Martha simply spent years making excuses for everyone except herself? You think this marriage failing would automatically be Nolan's fault? Diane continued calmly. Women lose marriages long before men leave them. Something inside Martha went still, because suddenly she understood exactly how Nolan became who he was. Diane didn't raise a son to love women. She raised a son to consume them. Martha smiled faintly, and that unsettled Diane immediately. What Diane asked cautiously. Nothing Martha answered gently. But internally, something massive was shifting. The old Martha would have cried herself to sleep after this dinner. The old Martha would have obsessed over becoming softer, prettier, easier to love. But the woman sitting here tonight had seen the truth now. Nolan didn't betray her because she lacked value. He betrayed her because entitlement had rotted him from the inside out. The terrace door opened again. Nolan returned smoothly, reclaiming his seat beside her. Sorry, he said casually. Work issue. Martha almost smiled. Work issue? Rebecca and the children reduced to scheduling inconvenience. You work too much, Diane murmured sympathetically toward Nolan. Poor Nolan, the exhausted provider, the burdened husband, the admired patriarch. Meanwhile, Martha sat beside him, carrying enough devastation to drown in. And no one at this table noticed. Or maybe worse, they noticed and simply preferred the version of reality that kept Nolan comfortable. Dessert arrived. Conversation softened, but Martha barely touched her food. Because while everyone else admired Nolan Dixon, Martha could suddenly see the cracks beneath the polished surface. The financial secrets, the lies, the manipulation. And something told her this double life cost far more money than Nolan wanted anyone discovering. That thought stayed with her the entire evening. After the guests finally left, Nolan loosened his tie while the catering staff cleaned the kitchen. You were quiet tonight, he observed casually. Martha removed her earrings slowly. I was listening. His eyes narrowed slightly. To what? The truth. For the first time all evening, Nolan looked genuinely unsettled. Good. Martha walked past him toward the staircase calmly, then paused halfway up. Oh, she said softly, without turning around. I scheduled a meeting with Evelyn Carter tomorrow morning. Silence. Heavy silence. When Martha finally looked back, all the color had drained from Nolan's face. Nolan barely touched Martha the next morning. Not goodbye, not affectionately, not even performatively. He kissed the air near her cheek while fastening his watch and avoiding direct eye contact. I have meetings all afternoon, he said carefully. Don't wait for dinner. Martha stood beside the espresso machine in silk pajamas, watching him with unnerving calm. Okay, that was all. No accusation, no emotion. And somehow that frightened Nolan more than screaming would have. She saw it in the tightness of his jaw, the nervous way he checked his phone twice before leaving, the pause at the front door. You talked to Evelyn already? He asked casually. Martha stirred cream into her coffee slowly. Not yet. Good. Too fast. Too relieved. There's no reason to drag accountants into personal misunderstandings. Personal misunderstandings. Martha almost admired his ability to minimize catastrophe. You're right, she said softly. Nolan studied her carefully, like he was trying to determine whether she was dangerous yet. Then he left. The moment the front door closed, Martha's expression changed completely. Cold, focused, awake. By 10:30, she sat across from Evelyn Carter inside a private office overlooking downtown Chicago. Evelyn looked nothing like the glamorous accountants people imagined wealthy clients hired. She was in her early 60s, sharp-eyed, silver-haired, and carried herself with the exhaustion of someone who had spent decades quietly cleaning up rich people's disasters. The moment Martha entered, Evelyn looked genuinely ill. "Martha," she whispered, "I'm so sorry." That told Martha everything immediately. She knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. Martha placed the duplicate tax folders carefully onto Evelyn's desk. "I need the truth." Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. For several seconds, silence hung heavily between them. Finally, Evelyn removed her glasses slowly. "How much have you discovered enough to know my husband has another family?" The words still tasted unreal. Evelyn visibly winced. "Oh, God." Martha leaned back in the chair, folding trembling hands together. How long? Evelyn hesitated. "Martha." "How long?" "Almost 9 years." The air vanished from Martha's lungs. 9 years. 9 years while she hosted holidays. 9 years while she buried miscarriages. 9 years while Nolan slept beside her, pretending loyalty. Martha stared out the window before speaking again, because if she looked directly at another human being right now, she might shatter. "And you knew?" Evelyn's face tightened with guilt. "I knew there was another property and unusual financial activity, but Nolan assured me the situation was legally complicated." "Legally complicated," Martha repeated hollowly. Evelyn opened a thick file slowly. "What happened the other day should never have happened. Your documents were mixed accidentally because Nolan insisted both portfolios remain under my management." Of course he did. Arrogant men always believed they controlled chaos until chaos learned their name. Evelyn slid several papers across the desk. Martha looked down. Property deeds, bank transfers, trust allocations, private school tuition payments, luxury vacation invoices. The numbers blurred together at first, then reality settled in piece by piece. The downtown apartment, Rebecca's car lease, children's medical insurance. Everything funded through layered accounts connected partially to marital assets. Connected to her. Martha's stomach turned violently. "That apartment," she whispered. Evelyn nodded grimly. "Partially financed through a liquidity transfer tied to your inheritance account." The room tilted. "My father's money." Evelyn said nothing. She didn't need to. Martha suddenly remembered standing beside Nolan at her father's funeral 14 years ago while Nolan held her hand and promised, "I'll protect everything your father worked for." Liar! Every memory with him felt infected now. Martha pressed her fingertips against her temple. "How much?" Evelyn hesitated again. "Martha, before I answer that, I need you to understand something important. No more protecting him." "I'm not." Evelyn leaned forward carefully. "What Nolan did may extend beyond infidelity." Martha looked up slowly. "What does that mean?" Evelyn slid another folder toward her. "This pattern suggests concealment strategies, duplicate reporting structures, hidden disbursements, potential tax exposure." The words sounded clinical, but Martha understood the meaning underneath. Fraud. Real fraud. Not just moral betrayal. Financial betrayal. The kind wealthy men committed because they believed power insulated them from consequences. "He used me," Martha whispered. Evelyn's expression softened sadly. Yes, the honesty hurt more than pity would have. Martha stared down at the documents again. She saw her entire marriage differently now. Every conversation about budgeting, every time Nolan discouraged her from returning to work full-time, every moment he insisted she didn't need stress, control disguised as care, dependence disguised as luxury. "You know what the worst part is?" Martha said quietly. Evelyn remained silent. I spent years thinking I was failing him somehow. Martha laughed bitterly. I thought if I became easier, prettier, calmer, maybe he'd love me the way he used to again. Evelyn's eyes darkened with something almost maternal. Martha, men like Nolan survive by convincing women their suffering is self-inflicted. That sentence landed deep, because suddenly Martha saw the pattern everywhere. Diane blaming her for infertility, Nolan calling her emotional, the subtle humiliations, the constant feeling that she needed to earn love already promised to her. Conditioned guilt, manufactured insecurity, and while Martha spent years shrinking herself to keep peace, Nolan expanded freely into two separate lives. Evelyn opened another folder quietly. There's something else. Martha braced herself. Nolan recently requested documentation regarding mental competency clauses tied to asset protection. The temperature in the room seemed to drop instantly. What? Evelyn's voice became careful. He asked questions about financial conservatorship procedures, emotional instability precedents during divorce litigation, medication history. Martha stared at her in disbelief. He's preparing to call me unstable. Evelyn didn't answer immediately. He's preparing for the possibility that you discover everything. A slow wave of horror moved through Martha's body. This wasn't impulsive cheating. This was strategic, planned. Nolan anticipated exposure eventually, and he already prepared a narrative where Martha became the hysterical wife, incapable of handling the truth rationally. Martha suddenly remembered every moment Nolan encouraged her to rest after anxiety attacks. Every time he commented on her stress levels in front of friends. Every subtle suggestion that she was emotionally fragile. He wasn't comforting her. He was building a future case. Tears finally spilled down Martha's face then. Not weak tears. Grieving tears. The kind people cry when they realize love was used as camouflage. I gave him everything, she whispered brokenly. Evelyn handed her tissues softly. I know. No. Martha shook her head slowly. You don't understand. I would have died for that man. The silence after that sentence hurt most, because it was true. Martha had spent 2 decades pouring herself into Nolan's dreams while slowly disappearing from her own life, and he repaid devotion with replacement. For several minutes, the only sound in the office was Martha trying not to completely fall apart. Then suddenly something shifted, small at first, a flicker, not hope, not healing, something harder, clarity. Martha wiped her tears slowly, then again, then she straightened in her chair. Evelyn noticed immediately. What are you thinking? Martha stared at the skyline beyond the windows. For the first time since discovering Rebecca, she stopped thinking like a devastated wife and started thinking like a survivor. If Nolan prepared for war, she said quietly, then he already believes I'll stay weak enough to lose it. Evelyn's eyes sharpened. Martha, he thinks grief makes women stupid. Her voice no longer trembled. That frightened even her a little, because beneath the heartbreak now, rage was evolving into discipline. Martha gathered the folders slowly and stood. Then she looked directly at Evelyn. He built 2 families using my loyalty, she said calmly. Now I'm going to dismantle everything he built using the one thing he never bothered respecting. And what's that? Martha's expression turned ice cold. Me. Martha expected to hate Rebecca Hayes. Honestly, she wanted to. Hatred would have made everything simpler, cleaner. There was comfort in believing another woman had deliberately stolen her life. Comfort in imagining Rebecca as manipulative, glamorous, cruel, the kind of woman who enjoyed destroying marriages for excitement. But 3 days after meeting with Evelyn Carter, Martha sat inside a quiet cafe across from St. Mary's Hospital and realized life was far messier than revenge fantasies allowed. Rebecca Hayes looked exhausted, not glamorous, not predatory, just tired. She wore navy scrubs beneath a beige wool coat, her blonde hair twisted into a rushed bun, while dark circles shadowed her eyes. A paper nursing textbook rested beside her untouched coffee. Martha watched from the corner table silently. Rebecca checked her phone every few minutes, waiting for Nolan. That hurt unexpectedly, because Martha recognized the behavior immediately. Women waiting emotionally for the same man. The thought felt almost humiliating. Outside snow drifted softly through downtown Chicago while Rebecca finally sighed and typed something quickly into her phone. A few seconds later, Martha's own stomach twisted when she saw Nolan's contact photo flash briefly on Rebecca's screen. Nolan, the same heart symbol, the same carefully curated affection. Martha suddenly wondered how many women Nolan needed loving him to feel complete. Rebecca rubbed her eyes tiredly before opening her nursing textbook again. Martha noticed handwritten notes covering nearly every page. Highlighted sections, study cards, dedication. Not laziness, not gold digging. A woman trying to build a future. Something about that realization complicated Martha's anger in ways she wasn't emotionally prepared for. Her phone buzzed suddenly. Daniel Brooks, the divorce attorney Evelyn recommended. Martha declined the call silently. Not yet. Because before lawyers and courts and destruction, she needed certainty, not about Nolan, about Rebecca. Martha gathered her courage slowly and stood. The moment she approached the table, Rebecca looked up politely. Then confusion crossed her face instantly. Recognition. "You," Rebecca said softly. Martha nodded once. "Can I sit down?" Rebecca hesitated, but only for a second. "Okay." The tension between them felt almost physical as Martha sat across from her. For several seconds, neither woman spoke. Rebecca looked nervous now, guarded. "I didn't know who you were at the gala," she admitted quietly. Martha studied her carefully. There it was again. No arrogance, no triumph, just uncertainty. "What did Nolan tell you about me?" Martha asked. Rebecca's fingers tightened around her coffee cup. "That your marriage has been over for years." Martha looked down briefly. "Of course." "He said you refused to sign divorce papers because of money." Rebecca swallowed nervously. "He said you stayed together publicly because of his company image." The lies were so specific, so polished. Nolan hadn't just created another life, he built entire narratives to sustain it. Martha asked quietly, "Did he tell you we still live together?" Rebecca blinked. "What, he sleeps in our house every night he isn't here?" Color drained from Rebecca's face instantly. "No." Martha reached into her purse slowly and placed a photograph on the table. Their 20th anniversary party. Nolan kissing Martha beside a giant floral arch while guests applauded around them. The date sat clearly printed in the corner. Rebecca stared at the picture. Then another. Christmas morning 2 years ago. Nolan in matching pajamas beside Martha beside the tree. Then another. A recent charity event. Public appearances, holidays, vacations, not separated, not broken up. A real marriage still actively existing. Rebecca's breathing changed. "No," she whispered weakly. Martha said nothing, because the truth no longer required performance. Rebecca suddenly pushed her chair back slightly like the air around her had become too thin. "He told me you hated him," she said shakily. "He said you barely spoke." Martha almost laughed at the cruelty of that. Nolan told Rebecca Martha was emotionally absent. Meanwhile, he told Martha work stress explained his emotional absence. 2 women, Two opposite lies. One manipulator. "When did you meet him?" Martha asked quietly. Rebecca stared at the table. 8 years ago. Martha closed her eyes briefly. 8 years, almost matching Evelyn's timeline. "He came into the restaurant where I worked nights," Rebecca continued softly. "I was trying to save money for nursing school." Her voice cracked slightly. "He was kind." That word nearly destroyed Martha, because Nolan used to be kind. Rebecca continued staring downward. "He listened to me. He remembered things. He showed up when my mom got sick." Tears filled her eyes slowly. Nobody had ever taken care of me like that before. Martha felt something painful shift inside her chest then. Not forgiveness. Recognition. Women like Rebecca were exactly the kind Nolan targeted. Women needing stability, protection, love. Women willing to trust warmth because life had not given them much of it before. "Did you ever ask why the divorce took so long?" Martha asked. "All the time." Rebecca laughed bitterly through tears. "There was always some excuse. Lawyers, finances, public image." She shook her head slowly. "God, I sound stupid." "No," Martha said immediately. Rebecca looked up surprised. "You sound manipulated." Silence settled between them. For the first time, neither woman looked like rivals, just casualties. Rebecca wiped beneath her eyes quickly. "The kids!" Her voice broke harder now. "The kids love him!" Martha looked away toward the snowy windows. That part hurt differently, because despite everything, Nolan clearly loved those children too, at least in some capacity, and somehow that made the betrayal even more disturbing, because it meant Nolan possessed the ability to love deeply. He simply chose dishonesty anyway. Rebecca suddenly frowned slightly. "Wait." Martha looked back. Rebecca stared at her carefully now. "You said he sleeps at your house every night he isn't here." "Yes!" Rebecca's face tightened. "He told me he traveled constantly for business." There it was again. Layered lies stacked on top of each other so carelessly they only survived because neither woman knew the full picture. Rebecca let out a broken laugh. "Oh my God." Martha remained quiet. Rebecca covered her mouth with trembling fingers. There were nights he disappeared completely. Her eyes widened slowly as realization spread across her face. "I thought he was with you." Martha stared at her, and suddenly both women understood something horrifying together. Nolan wasn't dividing himself between two women because he loved both. He divided himself because he needed constant emotional supply from everyone around him. Admiration, dependence, attention, validation. Rebecca leaned back weakly. "I gave up nursing school for almost 2 years after Ethan was born because Nolan said he'd take care of us." Martha's stomach tightened. "Financial dependence again, just different packaging." "He bought this apartment," Rebecca whispered. "Paid for the kids' schools." Martha thought about her father's inheritance account, about the spreadsheets, about the hidden transfers. Nolan had funded Rebecca's life using Martha's loyalty. Rebecca suddenly looked up again, panic rising into her expression. "Wait." Her voice trembled violently now. "Does this mean the money?" "Yes!" The word landed like shattered glass. Rebecca burst into tears instantly. Real tears. Humiliated tears. The kind women cry when they realize love has been weaponized against them. "I didn't know," she sobbed quietly. "I swear to God I didn't know." And Martha believed her. That was the worst part, because hatred would have been easier. Instead, she found herself staring at another woman emotionally trapped inside Nolan's carefully engineered world. A woman who had also sacrificed dreams, also waited by phones, also shaped her life around his promises. Rebecca wiped at her face helplessly. What do we do now? Martha looked out the cafe window again. Snow continued falling softly across the city. For the first time since discovering the affair, Martha stopped seeing Rebecca as the woman who stole her husband, because now she understood the truth. Nolan never truly belonged to either of them. Men like Nolan only belonged to themselves. And suddenly Martha realized something else, too. Rebecca wasn't the enemy. She was proof. Proof that Nolan's cruelty had no limits. Proof that manipulation looked like love when delivered by the right person. Proof that two women had nearly destroyed themselves trying to earn honesty from a man incapable of giving it. Martha stood slowly and reached for her coat. Then she looked directly at Rebecca. "He thinks we'll blame each other," she said quietly. Rebecca stared up at her through tears. Martha's expression hardened into something calm and dangerous. "I think it's time he learns what happens when we don't." The first thing Daniel Brooks said to Martha was, "Your husband is not smarter than the paper trail." Martha sat across from him inside a high-rise law office overlooking downtown Chicago, while snow drifted slowly beyond the glass walls. The office smelled faintly of coffee and leather-bound legal books. Daniel Brooks was nothing like Nolan, and maybe that was why Martha trusted him almost immediately. No performance, no charm, no manipulation disguised as confidence. Daniel was in his early 50s, sharp-eyed and painfully direct. He studied documents the way surgeons studied scans before difficult operations, carefully, without emotion clouding precision. Martha watched him flip through financial records Evelyn Carter helped assemble. Hidden transfers, mortgage structures, private tuition payments, duplicate insurance policies. Every page exposed another layer of Nolan's deception. Daniel finally leaned back in his chair slowly. "Well," he said calmly, "your husband is either catastrophically arrogant or catastrophically stupid." For the first time in weeks, Martha almost smiled. Can he actually lose everything? Daniel's expression didn't change. "If we do this correctly," he closed the folder. "Yes." The words settled heavily between them. "Lose everything, not just emotionally, legally, financially, publicly." Martha should have felt satisfaction immediately. Instead, she felt grief, because somewhere beneath all this destruction still lived the memory of the man she once loved enough to build a life around. Daniel seemed to notice her hesitation. "Mrs. Dixon," he said carefully, "I need you to understand something before we move forward." Martha looked up. This situation stopped being ordinary infidelity the moment he weaponized your finances and potentially prepared competency claims against you. A cold feeling crawled slowly down her spine. Daniel opened another file. "These notes concern me." Martha looked down. Typed legal inquiries, mental competency evaluations, asset protection recommendations, suggested litigation strategies, and then one sentence highlighted near the bottom: "Emotional instability history may strengthen negotiation leverage." Martha's stomach turned. Negotiation leverage. That's what Nolan saw her pain as. Leverage. Daniel's voice softened slightly. "He's building groundwork to portray you as emotionally volatile during divorce proceedings." Martha laughed quietly. Not because it was funny, because eventually betrayal becomes so grotesque it circles back into disbelief. "I buried 3 miscarriages," she whispered, "and he plans to call me unstable." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Martha." "No." She shook her head slowly. "Do you know how many nights I thought I was failing as a wife because I couldn't give him children?" Daniel remained silent. And suddenly, Martha understood something even uglier. Nolan let her blame herself intentionally, all while raising children somewhere else. The cruelty of that realization sat like broken glass inside her chest. Daniel slid another folder across the desk. Let's discuss asset exposure. Martha forced herself to focus, because grief without strategy only benefited Nolan. For the next hour, Daniel explained everything carefully. Financial concealment, corporate liability, marital asset tracing, fraud exposure. Martha listened while taking notes with frightening calm, and somewhere during the conversation, she stopped feeling like a devastated wife. Now she felt like a woman reconstructing a crime scene. Daniel pointed towards several highlighted transactions. These payments concern me most. Martha studied the pages. The apartment, vacation properties, luxury purchases, children's educational trusts. Daniel tapped one transfer specifically. This account links directly to your inheritance portfolio. Martha closed her eyes briefly. Her father. Again, every path somehow led back there. She remembered her father teaching her how to balance business ledgers at 16 years old. Money reveals character, he used to say, especially hidden money. If he could see Nolan now. Martha wasn't sure which would hurt him more, the betrayal itself, or the fact Nolan used the inheritance he entrusted to Martha as fuel for deception. Daniel interrupted her thoughts carefully. Has Nolan ever discouraged you from returning to full-time work? Martha blinked. Yes. How she hesitated. Then slowly he said, I didn't need stress. Martha swallowed. He always framed it like concern. Daniel nodded grimly. Financial dependency often develops gradually in manipulative marriages, especially wealthy ones. The words landed hard, because Martha suddenly realized luxury had insulated her from recognizing control. She had mistaken comfort for security. But real security did not disappear the moment someone stopped loving you. Daniel continued reviewing notes. Did he ever document your anxiety episodes medically? Martha's stomach tightened immediately. Yes. How extensively? A few therapists. Some temporary medication after my second miscarriage. Daniel cursed quietly under his breath. What? He's creating a narrative. Martha stared at him. Daniel leaned forward carefully. Listen to me very closely. Nolan Dixon is not behaving like a guilty husband. He's behaving like a man preparing containment strategy. Containment strategy. God. Even the language sounded corporate. Calculated. Martha suddenly remembered dozens of subtle moments differently now. Nolan insisting she rest during emotional periods. Nolan speaking for her during difficult conversations. Nolan joking publicly about her being sensitive. Not random. Conditioning. Preparation. Daniel studied her expression carefully. You still love him? It wasn't a question. Martha looked away toward the snowy skyline. I love who I thought he was. Daniel nodded slowly. That distinction matters. Silence settled over the office. Then Daniel opened a final folder. What I'm about to show you stays here for now. Martha frowned slightly. Inside were private investigator notes Evelyn had quietly commissioned after discovering financial inconsistencies months earlier. Hotel records, flight patterns, expense reimbursements, timeline overlaps. Martha scanned the pages slowly until one specific section caught her attention. Competency consultation inquiries, dated nearly 2 years earlier. 2 years. Nolan had been preparing potential legal protection against her long before she discovered Rebecca. Long before exposure. Long before consequences. Martha felt physically cold. He planned for this. Daniel nodded once. I believe your husband always intended eventual separation. He paused carefully. He just intended to control the outcome. Meaning Martha emotionally unstable, Martha financially dependent, Martha isolated, Martha discredited. Meanwhile, Nolan protected publicly, respected publicly, untouchable publicly, The terrifying part, without Evelyn's accidental document mistake, his plan might have worked. Martha suddenly stood and walked toward the windows because sitting still felt impossible. Below them, Chicago moved normally. Cars, pedestrians, ordinary lives. Nobody outside knew hers had detonated completely. Daniel spoke quietly behind her. "You know what men like Nolan fear most." Martha crossed her arms tightly. What documentation? That almost made her smile again, because for the first time since discovering the affair, fear was shifting direction. Not hers, his. Daniel joined her near the window. "You've spent years emotionally surviving him," he said calmly. "Now you need to start strategically surviving him." Martha looked at her reflection in their glass. She barely recognized herself anymore. The softness around her had hardened, not cruelly, clearly, like someone waking from anesthesia during surgery and finally realizing who held the knife. Daniel handed her another document. "What's this?" "A temporary financial protection request." Martha scanned the paperwork. Account protections, asset freezes, emergency legal safeguards. This was real now, irreversible. Her marriage was no longer collapsing privately. It was becoming a battlefield. Martha Daniels said carefully, "Once we move forward, Nolan will panic." She looked up slowly. "Good." Daniel studied her for a moment, then nodded slightly. "You're stronger than he thinks." Martha's expression darkened quietly. "No." She folded the papers carefully into her purse. "I'm finally seeing myself clearly for the first time in years." Her phone buzzed suddenly. "Nolan." Martha stared at the screen while Daniel remained silent. One text. "Dinner. Thought we could reconnect. Reconnect. After years of lies, after building another family, after preparing legal strategies against her." Martha felt something icy settle inside her chest. Not heartbreak anymore. Control. Slowly she typed back, "Of course. I'd love that." Then she locked the phone screen calmly. Daniel raised an eyebrow slightly. "You're playing along." Martha picked up her coat. "For now." And as she walked toward the office door, one terrifying realization echoed through her mind. Nolan still believed he was managing her, which meant he had absolutely no idea what was coming next. The ballroom glittered like money pretending to be elegance. Crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors, while Chicago's wealthiest executives drifted between champagne towers and silent auction displays beneath soft gold lighting. A jazz quartet played near the stage, smooth and forgettable, designed to make rich people feel cinematic while discussing investments. Nolan loved rooms like this. Rooms where admiration followed him naturally. Rooms where nobody questioned him. Martha stood beside him near the entrance, one hand resting lightly on his arm while photographers snapped pictures for the Charity Foundation's press page. She smiled perfectly. That was the strange thing about heartbreak. After enough damage, performance became easy. Closer together, the photographer called. Nolan's hand slid against Martha's waist automatically. Possessive. Practiced. She wondered how many women he touched with that exact same gesture. The camera flashed. Another perfect lie preserved forever. "You look beautiful tonight," Nolan murmured beside her once the photographer moved away. Martha turned slowly toward him. A month ago, those words would have mattered. Now they sounded like lines from a salesman protecting commission. "Thank you," she answered softly. Nolan studied her carefully, still suspicious, still trying to determine whether she knew everything yet. Martha had become very skilled at pretending she didn't. That unsettled him more every day. The gala honored corporate donors funding pediatric cancer programs across Illinois. Nolan's company sponsored nearly half the event, which meant he spent most of the evening surrounded by investors, politicians, and board members treating him like royalty. Watching him move through the ballroom felt surreal now. The same man who lied effortlessly to two families stood beneath chandeliers, discussing integrity and leadership, and everyone believed him. A server passed carrying champagne flutes. Martha accepted one slowly, while Nolan greeted another executive nearby. "She's gorgeous." Martha turned. A woman in emerald silk smiled warmly beside her. "Sorry," Martha asked politely. The woman nodded toward Nolan. "Your husband. Honestly, every woman in this city envies you." Martha almost choked on her champagne. Instead, she smiled calmly. "That's very kind." The woman laughed lightly. "No, seriously. Men like Nolan barely exist anymore." Martha stared into her glass. Men like Nolan existed everywhere. That was the problem. They simply wore expensive suits and knew how to shake hands properly. Martha. She looked up immediately. Nolan had returned beside her, relaxed and polished as always. "There's someone I want you to meet. Another board member, another investor." Another smiling stranger praising Nolan's brilliance while Martha stood beside him like decorative proof of stability. Through it all, she kept noticing the same thing. Nolan never fully relaxed tonight. His eyes kept moving around the room, searching, checking, anticipating. Fear had finally entered him. Small, but growing. Good. A little after 8:30, Martha excused herself toward the bar. She needed space before the constant pretending suffocated her. The bartender handed her sparkling water with lime. "Rough night?" he asked casually. Martha smiled faintly. "Something like that. You hide it well." If only he knew. Behind her, the ballroom doors opened again. Martha turned absent-mindedly and froze. Rebecca Hayes stood near the entrance wearing a dark navy gown with her blonde hair swept elegantly over one shoulder. She looked uncomfortable immediately, like someone unused to rooms filled with generational wealth and polished cruelty. For one second, Martha genuinely thought she might be hallucinating. Then she saw the donor badge clipped beside Rebecca's purse. St. Mary's Pediatric Fundraiser Committee. Of course. Rebecca volunteered through the hospital. Nolan's face lost all color across the ballroom. Martha saw it instantly. Pure panic. Not because he feared hurting either woman, because his compartments were colliding, and men like Nolan survived by keeping realities separated. Rebecca noticed him too. Her expression softened automatically. Warmth, trust, love. Then her eyes shifted slightly toward Martha, toward the diamond bracelet resting on Martha's wrist. Rebecca went still. Martha felt her own heartbeat slow strangely, because the bracelet was unmistakable. Custom Cartier, engraved inside with 20 years. Still my home. Nolan gave it to Martha publicly at their anniversary gala last year. The photographs were online everywhere. Rebecca looked from the bracelet to Nolan to Martha again. Understanding began creeping slowly across her face. Nolan crossed the ballroom immediately, too quickly, too nervously. "Martha," he said lowly once he reached her, "we need to leave." Martha sipped her water calmly. "Why, you're tired." "No," she answered quietly. "I'm actually very interested in staying." Nolan's jaw tightened. Across the room, Rebecca still stared at them, confusion spreading deeper every second. "Nolan," Martha said softly, "you look nervous. I'm asking you nicely." Martha almost smiled. Asking nicely, that was new. For years, Nolan operated from assumption, not request. He assumed Martha would tolerate loneliness, assume forgiveness, assume silence. But fear was changing him now. Interesting. Before Nolan could speak again, a politician interrupted them cheerfully. Nolan, there you are! The interruption forced Nolan back into performance mode instantly. His smile returned. Flawless. Controlled. Senator Green Nolan greeted warmly. Martha watched the transformation carefully. That was the thing about narcissistic men. They could transition emotionally within seconds because authenticity was never involved to begin with. The senator laughed. Your wife is saving this event tonight, Nolan. Martha, that dress is incredible. Martha smiled politely. Nolan's hand returned to her waist possessively. Mine. That gesture suddenly disgusted her. Across the ballroom, Rebecca watched everything, and slowly her expression changed. Not confusion anymore. Recognition, because women always recognize the difference between a wife and an ex-wife. And Martha did not look like a divorced woman. She looked established, embedded, permanent. Rebecca began walking toward them. Nolan noticed immediately. His entire body stiffened. Martha, he whispered sharply, don't. The fear in his voice almost satisfied her. Almost. Rebecca stopped a few feet away, close enough now to see the matching wedding rings, close enough to see the familiarity between Martha and Nolan that only decades created. Nolan, Rebecca said carefully. The senator looked between them politely. You all know each other, silence. Heavy, dangerous silence. Martha could practically hear Nolan calculating outcomes in real time. Lie, deflect, control. Rebecca's eyes moved slowly back toward Martha, then down again, toward the bracelet, the engraved bracelet. Her face drained completely. Oh my God, she whispered. Nolan stepped forward immediately. Rebecca, no. Her voice cracked sharply. No, don't! Several nearby guests turned subtly toward the tension. Martha remained perfectly still. Rebecca looked directly at her now, not hostile, horrified. You're his wife. Not a question. A realization. Martha nodded once slowly. Yes. The word shattered something visibly inside Rebecca. Nolan grabbed Rebecca's elbow gently. Let's talk privately. Rebecca jerked away from him instantly. How long, she whispered. Nolan glanced around the ballroom nervously. Rebecca not here. How long? His silence answered for him. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears almost immediately. The senator quietly excused himself. Smart man. Martha watched Nolan carefully. For the first time since she met him at 23 years old, he looked small, not powerful, not charismatic, just trapped. Rebecca looked between both of them again, and then finally asked the question Martha knew would destroy everything. Who exactly are you to know? The ballroom suddenly felt very, very quiet. The private lounge outside the ballroom smelled like expensive whiskey and panic. Rebecca stood near the window with her arms wrapped tightly around herself, while tears slid silently down her face. Below them, Chicago glittered coldly beneath the night sky, unaware that 3 lives had just detonated 20 floors above the city. Nolan shut the lounge door behind them sharply. Everybody calm down. Martha almost laughed at the absurdity. Calm down! As if this were a scheduling mistake instead of a decade-long betrayal. Rebecca turned toward him slowly. You're married. Not emotional now. Not hysterical, just devastated. Nolan exhaled heavily. It's complicated. Martha closed her eyes briefly. There it was again. That pathetic sentence men used when the truth was too ugly to say aloud. Rebecca shook her head in disbelief. No. Her voice trembled. No, don't do that. Don't say that like this is some misunderstanding. Nolan stepped closer carefully. Rebecca, I was trying to protect everyone. By lying to everyone, his jaw tightened. Martha watched the exchange silently, And for the first time, she saw Nolan struggling to manage multiple realities simultaneously. Usually, he controlled conversations easily, redirected emotions, softened consequences. But now both women stood in the same room comparing truths, and manipulation weakened under comparison. Rebecca looked toward Martha again. "How long have you known? A few weeks." Rebecca inhaled sharply. "And you came here tonight knowing I'd be here." "No," Martha answered honestly. "I didn't know you were attending." Nolan rubbed both hands over his face roughly. "We shouldn't do this here." Rebecca laughed bitterly through tears. "Where would you prefer, Nolan, your other apartment or your wife's house?" The word wife visibly hit him. "Good." Martha remained near the doorway, composed in a way that frightened even herself. Because something strange happened when betrayal crossed a certain threshold. Eventually, pain became clarity, and clarity was cold. Rebecca turned back toward Martha slowly. "Tell me the truth," Nolan interrupted immediately. "Rebecca, no," she snapped toward him. "You've lied enough." Silence filled the room. Then Martha reached into her clutch bag calmly. She removed several folded documents: marriage certificate, joint property records, anniversary gala photos. 22 years condensed into paper evidence. Rebecca stared at them while her breathing became uneven. "This is real," she whispered. "Yes." Nolan moved forward instantly. "Martha, stop." The command in his voice almost made her smile. Interesting. He still believed he controlled her. Martha handed Rebecca the marriage certificate first. Rebecca's hands shook violently while reading it. Date of marriage, September 14th. 22 years earlier. Oh my God. Next came property ownership records, joint investment accounts, public charity appearances, evidence impossible to explain away. Rebecca looked physically ill now. "You told me she refused to let go," she whispered toward Nolan. "You said the marriage died years ago." Nolan's voice hardened slightly. "It basically did." Martha looked at him calmly. That sentence should have shattered her. Instead, it only confirmed what she already understood. Nolan rewrote emotional history depending on his audience. To Rebecca, Martha became cold and controlling. To Martha, Rebecca probably became unstable and needy. Women separated, Nolan centered. Classic. Rebecca wiped beneath her eyes angrily. "So every holiday," her voice cracked, "every birthday, every night you left my apartment." Nolan stayed silent. Because there was no surviving arithmetic, not when two timelines finally aligned. Martha spoke quietly. "He spent Christmas morning with me 3 years ago." Rebecca stared at her. "No," Martha nodded once. "He told me he had emergency consulting work Christmas Eve." Rebecca's face collapsed. "Last Christmas Eve," Rebecca whispered brokenly, "he slept beside me." Silence. Then suddenly both women understood the full horror together. Nolan wasn't splitting time fairly. He was overlapping lives recklessly because he assumed neither woman would ever compare notes. Rebecca laughed weakly through tears. "Oh my God." Ethan asked why Santa came twice once. Martha's stomach twisted. The children. Always the children. No matter how monstrous Nolan became, innocent people remained tangled inside the wreckage. Nolan finally snapped. "Enough." Both women looked at him. His expression had changed completely now. No softness, no guilt, only frustration, because exposure angered men like Nolan more than betrayal itself. "I made mistakes," he said tightly, "but neither of you understand the pressure I've been under." Martha blinked slowly. Pressure. That was his defense. Not remorse, not accountability, stress. Rebecca stared at him in disbelief. "You had 2 families. I was trying to make everyone happy. The audacity of that sentence nearly suffocated the room. Martha spoke softly. "No, Nolan, you were trying to make yourself feel important." His eyes snapped toward her sharply. "There it is," he muttered bitterly. "The judgment." "The judgment?" Rebecca's voice rose suddenly. "You lied to me for 8 years." Nolan turned toward her. "And I loved you." Martha watched Rebecca freeze. Because manipulative men always weaponized love during collapse, confuse the victim, redirect the pain. But Rebecca looked different now, more awake. "You loved being needed," she whispered. That landed. Nolan's face darkened immediately. Rebecca continued trembling. "You promised me a future." "And I meant it." How she cried. "How were you planning to marry me while still married to her?" Nolan said nothing, because he never planned that far. Men like Nolan only managed the immediate emotional supply. Admiration today, validation tonight, consequences later. Martha quietly removed her phone from her purse. "There's more." Nolan looked instantly alert. "Martha." She ignored him and opened screenshots Rebecca had already sent earlier that afternoon after their cafe conversation. Texts, voice recordings, messages Nolan never expected both women to see simultaneously. Rebecca watched silently while Martha played one audio file. Nolan's voice filled the lounge softly. "Martha's emotionally unstable lately. I'm trying to handle her carefully." Rebecca looked horrified. Another message. "She depends on me financially. Once legal stuff settles, everything changes." Another. "She doesn't really understand business anyway." Martha's chest tightened hearing it aloud. Not because it surprised her anymore, because humiliation sounded uglier when spoken in your husband's actual voice. Rebecca covered her mouth slowly. "He talked about both of us like responsibilities," she whispered. Nolan stepped forward furiously. "Give me the phone." Martha's gaze lifted calmly toward him. "No." The simplicity of that answer seemed to shake him. Because for years Martha softened instantly whenever he became angry, now she looked at him without fear, and that terrified him more than screaming would have. Rebecca suddenly sat down heavily on the couch like her legs could no longer support her. "I left nursing school for you," she whispered brokenly. Nolan's expression flickered slightly. "I know. I trusted you with my children. I love those kids." Martha watched carefully. That part was true. Disturbingly true. Nolan genuinely loved the children, which somehow made everything worse, because it proved he understood emotional attachment perfectly. He simply believed his desires mattered more than the damage he caused. Rebecca looked up again. "When were you going to tell me?" Nolan hesitated. That hesitation answered everything. Rebecca's face hardened slowly through tears. "Oh my God." Martha recognized the exact moment heartbreak transformed into anger. She had lived it herself already. Rebecca stood again carefully. Then she looked directly at Martha. Not with jealousy, not with shame, with understanding. "What do we do now?" Nolan immediately interrupted. "We don't do anything dramatic." Martha almost smiled at the fear hidden inside that sentence. Too late. Drama had already arrived. The only question now was who controlled the ending. Rebecca wiped her face slowly before reaching into her purse. "There's something you should both know." Nolan's posture changed instantly. Alert, dangerous. Rebecca pulled out her phone, then opened a folder. Voice recordings, videos, financial screenshots, dozens of files. "I started saving things 6 months ago," she admitted quietly, because something stopped making sense. Nolan went pale. Rebecca looked directly at Martha. "I think I have enough evidence to destroy him." And for the first time since this nightmare began, Martha felt something dangerously close to hope. Nolan Dixon's birthday party looked like the kind of night magazines called unforgettable. Martha silently agreed, just not for the reasons anyone else expected. The private rooftop venue overlooked downtown Chicago in glittering gold and silver reflections. Live violinists played near cascading champagne towers, while executives, investors, politicians, and socialites moved through the room wrapped in designer fabric and expensive perfume. Everything screamed success, power, prestige, exactly the image Nolan spent years building. And tonight, he intended to celebrate it. "Smile," Nolan whispered beside Martha as another photographer raised a camera. Martha smiled perfectly. Click. Another lie captured forever. "You're in a good mood tonight," Nolan observed carefully once the photographer moved away. Martha adjusted the sleeve of her black velvet gown calmly. "Shouldn't I be? It's your birthday." His eyes narrowed slightly. Even now, Nolan still sensed danger around her without understanding its shape. "Good." Across the rooftop, Daniel Brooks stood near the bar speaking casually with Evelyn Carter while pretending not to know Martha at all. Rebecca had not arrived yet. That part was intentional. Timing mattered tonight. Everything mattered tonight. For the past 2 weeks, Martha had transformed grief into preparation. Daniel handled legal protections quietly. Evelyn assembled financial records. Rebecca gathered messages, recordings, and timelines. And Martha learned how terrifying a calm woman could become. Nolan raised a glass toward a group of executives approaching them. "There's my favorite power couple," one investor laughed warmly. Martha almost smiled at the irony. Power couple. Meanwhile, Nolan's empire already had cracks spreading beneath the foundation. The investor clapped Nolan's shoulder. 48 years old and still making the rest of us look lazy. Nolan grinned effortlessly. "Fear keeps me productive." Fear. Interesting choice of words. Martha sipped champagne silently while observing him. He looked confident again tonight, almost relaxed. Like part of him believed he regained control after the gala disaster with Rebecca. That was Nolan's weakness. He mistook silence for surrender. The truth, Martha had simply stopped wasting emotion on men who weaponized it. A woman approached Martha near the dessert table later that evening. "You're glowing tonight." Martha turned politely. It was Vanessa Holloway, wife of one of Nolan's senior partners. Beautiful, sharp, socially dangerous in the way wealthy women often became after years observing powerful men lie professionally. Vanessa tilted her head slightly. "You know," she said softly, "this is the first time I've seen you look happy in years." The comment startled Martha, not because it was cruel, because it was honest. "How sad is that?" Martha replied quietly. Vanessa studied her carefully for another moment, then lowered her voice. "Whatever's changing," she said. "Don't let anybody convince you to shrink back down." Martha stared at her. Women always noticed more than men believed. Across the rooftop, Nolan laughed loudly beside a senator while people gathered around him naturally like planets orbiting gravity. He looked untouchable. That was what made tonight beautiful. Powerful men never believed consequences applied to them until consequences arrived publicly. Nolan eventually crossed back toward Martha carrying fresh champagne. "You okay?" he asked. "Perfect." He studied her face. "You've been different lately." Martha met his gaze calmly. "Maybe I finally got tired of being underestimated." Something flickered behind his eyes then. Unease. Tiny, but growing. Before Nolan could respond, Diane Dixon appeared beside them, draped in silver silk and diamonds. "My handsome birthday boy," she announced dramatically before kissing Nolan's cheek. Then her attention shifted toward Martha. "You look thin." Martha smiled faintly. "You look observant." Diane's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Interesting. The old Martha would have apologized immediately after sarcasm. This version did not. Nolan stepped between the tension smoothly. "Relax tonight, both of you." Martha almost laughed. Relaxation was impossible now. The countdown had already begun. At 9:15, Daniel discreetly checked his watch from across the rooftop. "Ready." Martha's heartbeat slowed instead of speeding up. That surprised her most. She expected fear tonight, expected panic. Instead, she felt strangely peaceful. Because after years of emotional confusion, truth simplified everything. Nolan lifted his glass suddenly against the crystal knife. The rooftop quieted immediately. Speech several guests shouted playfully. Nolan grinned. Always comfortable holding attention. First he said smoothly, "Thank you all for being here tonight." Applause followed. Martha watched him carefully while city lights reflected behind him. A man standing at the center of a life built partially from deception. "I know how lucky I am," Nolan continued, "to have loyal friends, incredible colleagues." Then his hand found Martha's waist gently. "And an extraordinary wife." More applause. Martha smiled beautifully. Inside she felt nothing. Not rage anymore. Not heartbreak. Just clarity sharpened into steel. Nolan kissed her temple lightly before continuing the speech. "To success, to family, to the people who stay beside you through everything, family." The word echoed almost mockingly through the rooftop. Martha glanced briefly toward the elevators. "Still waiting." Nolan finished his toast smoothly. Guests cheered. Music resumed. Conversations restarted. And then the elevator doors opened. Rebecca stepped onto the rooftop. A hush didn't fall immediately, but tension moved invisibly through the atmosphere like static before lightning. Rebecca wore a dark emerald dress tonight. Elegant. Controlled. Her makeup carefully hid signs of crying. Beside her stood Evelyn Carter, and behind them, 2 children, Ethan and Lily. Nolan saw them instantly. His entire body went rigid. Martha watched the exact second terror entered his eyes again. Real terror this time. Not suspicion, certainty. Diane frowned. "Who are those people?" He didn't answer, because there was no explanation left. Rebecca walked forward calmly, while guests slowly noticed the resemblance between Nolan and the little boy holding her hand, the same eyes, the same smile. Whispers started immediately. Martha could practically hear Nolan's reputation cracking around the room. Rebecca said quietly once she reached them. The violinist stopped playing. No one instructed them to, but musicians recognized disaster when they saw it. Diane looked confused now. "What is this?" Rebecca's eyes moved briefly toward Martha. Martha nodded once. "Now." Nolan stepped forward quickly. "Rebecca, not here." Rebecca's expression hardened. "You should have thought about that 8 years ago." Murmurs spread louder across the rooftop. One investor looked visibly alarmed already. Good. Martha reached slowly for the champagne glass resting near her plate. The room felt cinematic suddenly, every sound sharper, every breath heavier. Nolan turned toward her desperately. "Martha." That tone. Warning mixed with pleading. Too late. She stood gracefully, and the entire rooftop gradually fell silent. Crystal chandeliers flickered softly overhead, while 100 wealthy guests stared toward the woman Nolan Dixon spent years underestimating. Martha raised her champagne glass slightly. Her voice came out calm, controlled, deadly. "I'd like to make a toast," she said softly. Nolan's face lost all color. "Martha, don't." She ignored him completely. Tonight was not about revenge anymore. Tonight was about truth, finally walking into the room uninvited. Martha looked around slowly at the executives, investors, politicians, and family members surrounding Nolan, then finally back at her husband. To the man she said quietly, who somehow convinced two women he was the victim, while secretly building two separate families using one shared bank account. Silence crashed across the rooftop. Absolute silence, and for the first time in 22 years, Nolan Dixon had nowhere left to hide. Nobody moved. Nobody even breathed loudly. The rooftop stood frozen beneath gold chandelier light, while Martha Dixon held a champagne glass in one hand and 22 years of betrayal in the other. Nolan stared at her like he no longer recognized the woman standing in front of him. Good, because Martha barely recognized herself either. The old Martha would have protected him, protected his image, protected his comfort, protected the illusion even while bleeding inside it. That woman was gone now. Martha Nolan said quietly through clenched teeth, put the glass down. His voice carried warning, authority. The same tone he used every time he wanted control restored quickly. Martha looked at him calmly. No. That single word echoed harder than shouting ever could. Around them, guests exchanged uneasy glances while phones slowly appeared in discreet hands. Wealthy people loved scandal, especially when it happened to someone richer than them. Diane Dixon stepped forward sharply. "What exactly is going on here?" Martha turned toward her mother-in-law slowly. "You spent years blaming me for not giving Nolan children," she said softly. "Turns out he already had two." The words landed like a bomb. Diane's face went white instantly. What Rebecca stood beside Evelyn Carter now, one hand protectively resting against Ethan's shoulder. The little boy looked confused while Lily clung tightly to Rebecca's dress. Nolan finally snapped, "This is not the place for this conversation." Martha almost smiled. Men like Nolan always believed location mattered more than behavior. "You're right," she replied calmly. "The proper place would have been honesty. But we missed that opportunity about 9 years ago." A nervous laugh escaped somewhere near the bar before immediately dying. Nolan took a dangerous step closer. "You're embarrassing yourself. That sentence, that pathetic attempt to redirect shame onto her." Martha felt almost detached listening to him now, like observing a man drowning while insisting everyone else cause the ocean. "No," she answered quietly. "I'm embarrassing you. The difference mattered." A board member named Richard Holloway cleared his throat awkwardly. "Nolan?" His expression darkened as he glanced toward Ethan. "Is this true?" Nolan looked around desperately now, searching for exits, control, anything. "It's complicated." Several people visibly reacted to that, because even in elite circles, complicated translated universally into guilty. Rebecca laughed bitterly beside Martha. "He really loves that word." Nolan shot her a furious glare. Rebecca stopped talking, and there it was again. The command. The assumption that women existed to become silent when he required it. Rebecca's entire expression changed then. Not heartbreak anymore. Disgust. "No," she said softly. "I've been quiet for 8 years. I'm done." Martha glanced at her briefly. Strange. A few weeks ago these women were strangers. Now they stood side by side beneath rooftop lights watching the same man unravel publicly. Diane looked physically ill. "Nolan," she whispered sharply, "tell me this is some kind of misunderstanding." Silence. That was answer enough. Diane staggered backwards slightly like someone slapped her. Grant Dixon muttered a curse under his breath near the dessert table. The investors looked horrified now. Not morally horrified. Financially horrified. Scandal threatened money, and money terrified powerful men more than betrayal ever would. Martha placed her champagne glass down carefully, then reached for the small black folder Daniel Brooks had prepared. Nolan noticed immediately. Panic flashed across his face. Martha too late. She opened the folder slowly. Inside, bank transfers, property documents, tax filings, proof. "You told everyone I was emotional," Martha said calmly while removing papers one by one. "Difficult, unstable." Her eyes lifted toward Nolan. "Meanwhile, you used my inheritance to finance another household." Whispers exploded louder around the rooftop. One woman actually gasped. Richard Holloway looked stunned. "You used marital funds." Nolan's composure cracked visibly for the first time. "It's not illegal." Evelyn Carter finally stepped forward. "Actually," she said carefully, "some of it may be." The silence afterward felt violent. Nolan turned toward Evelyn in disbelief. "You're involved in this." Evelyn held his gaze steadily. "No, Nolan, I'm correcting it." Martha watched the shift happen in real time, the room changing sides, not emotionally, strategically, because once accountants and legal terminology entered scandal, wealthy people stopped dismissing things as personal matters. Now it threatened reputations, companies, shareholders. Diane looked between the children and Rebecca again. "Oh my God," she whispered faintly. Ethan tugged Rebecca's hand quietly. "Mom." That small voice nearly shattered the room, because suddenly the scandal became undeniably human. Not gossip. Children. Real children. Nolan moved immediately toward them. "Rebecca, take them home." Rebecca stepped back. "No." His jaw tightened dangerously. "I'm serious. And I was serious when I asked if you were still married." The room grew even quieter somehow. Martha noticed several guests recording openly now. Nolan noticed too, and that finally broke him. "Turn those phones off," he barked suddenly. "There he is, the real Nolan, not polished, not charming, entitled, angry, terrified." One investor muttered quietly to another, "This is a disaster." Martha almost pitied Nolan then. Almost. Because she remembered loving him once, really loving him. But grief had transformed into something cleaner now. Justice. Not screaming justice, not revenge fantasy justice. Truth exposed under bright lights where manipulation could no longer survive. Nolan turned back toward Martha viciously. "You think this makes you look good?" The cruelty in his voice shocked several guests immediately. Martha remained perfectly calm. "No." She tilted her head slightly. "I think your behavior makes me look tragic." That landed harder than anger would have. Because tragedy invited sympathy, and narcissists hated losing narrative control. Rebecca suddenly pulled out her phone. "I have recordings too." Nolan went still. Pure stillness. "What recordings?" Diane asked weakly. Rebecca pressed play before anyone could stop her. Nolan's voice filled the rooftop speakers clearly. "Martha depends on me financially. She'd fall apart without me." Another clip. "She's too emotional to survive divorce cleanly." Another. "Rebecca's easier, less complicated." Gasps spread openly now. Martha felt something strange hearing the recordings publicly. Not humiliation anymore. Freedom. Because secrets lost power once dragged into daylight. Nolan lunged toward Rebecca. "Turn that off!" Richard Holloway stepped directly between them instantly. "Easy." Nolan looked around wildly now, at the phones, at the investors, at the board members, at Diane's horrified face, at Martha, and for the first time, he understood. This was not damage control anymore. This was collapse. Martha saw the exact second he realized it. His breathing changed, his eyes darkened. Fear finally consumed the arrogance completely. "You planned this," he whispered toward Martha. She looked at him quietly. No. Her voice stayed calm. You planned this the moment you decided two women existed to feed your ego while you destroyed them privately. Silence. Then Diane spoke again weakly. Nolan, tell me this isn't fraud. He didn't answer quickly enough. That was enough. Richard Holloway cursed quietly under his breath. Another executive immediately stepped away from Nolan like scandal itself might spread physically. One board member pulled out his phone and walked off rapidly. Damage control calls already beginning, Nolan noticed. And suddenly he exploded. This is her fault, he shouted, pointing at Martha. She's been emotionally unstable for years. The rooftop froze again. Martha stared at him. There it is, the plan, the narrative Daniel warned about. But Nolan made one fatal mistake. He revealed it too early, too publicly, and now everyone could see exactly what he was doing. Rebecca looked horrified. You're blaming her! Nolan ran both hands through his hair aggressively. She manipulated this entire situation. Evelyn Carter stepped forward coldly. No, Nolan. Your financial records did. That sentence destroyed whatever credibility he had left. Complete silence followed. Then somewhere near the back of the rooftop, someone started clapping slowly, not mockingly, respectfully. Martha turned slightly. Vanessa Holloway stood near the bar, eyes locked on Martha with quiet admiration. One clap became two, then stopped. But the message already landed. The room no longer saw Martha as the unstable wife. They saw a woman surviving public betrayal with more dignity than Nolan survived exposure. And Nolan knew it. That realization broke something final inside him. By morning, Nolan Dixon's face was everywhere. Not on magazine covers, not in business journals, not beside headlines praising leadership. This time his face lived beneath words like corporate executive exposed for secret double-life financial misconduct investigation, possible viral charity gala scandal, rocks, Chicago elite. The rooftop videos spread overnight. Every recording, every accusation, every moment of Nolan unraveling publicly beneath chandelier light. Martha sat alone in the breakfast room, watching muted television coverage, while pale winter sunlight stretched across marble floors. Strangely, she didn't feel victorious, just tired, deeply tired, because revenge fantasies never showed the aftermath. They never showed women sitting in silence realizing their entire lives had been split into before and after. Her phone buzzed constantly on the table. Unknown numbers, journalists, social invitations suddenly disappearing. Messages from women she barely knew saying things like, "I'm so sorry. You handled yourself beautifully. Men like him never change." Martha ignored all of them. The only message she reread twice came from Rebecca. "Thank you for telling the truth before he destroyed both of us completely." Martha stared at the text quietly, then locked the screen. Upstairs drawers slammed violently. Nolan. He hadn't slept. Neither had she. But unlike Martha's quiet grief, Nolan's panic sounded loud, aggressive, desperate. The bedroom door opened sharply a few seconds later. Martha. She didn't turn around immediately. Nolan stood in the doorway, still wearing yesterday's dress shirt, now wrinkled and half unbuttoned. Dark circles shadowed his eyes while fury radiated off him almost physically. Good. For once he looked like the damage he caused. "You humiliated me." Martha slowly lifted her coffee cup. Interesting. Not "I hurt you," not "I'm sorry." Humiliated me. Because narcissists always experienced consequences as victimization. "You had two families," she answered quietly. "You blindsided me publicly." Martha finally looked at him then. "And you blindsided me privately for 9 years." That stopped him briefly. Only briefly. Nolan began pacing the room aggressively. You had no right to involve my business contacts. Martha almost laughed. No right. The audacity still amazed her. You involved them when you committed financial fraud using marital assets. His head snapped toward her. Watch your words. No, Martha said calmly. You should have watched yours when you told another woman I was emotionally unstable while spending my inheritance on her apartment. Something dangerous flickered behind Nolan's eyes then. There he is. The real man, not polished anymore, not controlled. Cornered men became honest accidentally. You think you're innocent in all this, he snapped suddenly. You checked out of this marriage years ago. Martha stared at him in disbelief. You cheated on me with an entire second family. And why do you think that happened? The room went silent. Even now. Even after exposure. Even after humiliation. He still needed her responsible for his choices. Martha set her coffee down carefully. That sentence she said softly is the exact moment I stopped loving you. Nolan froze, not because she yelled, because she didn't. Calm women frightened men who depended on emotional chaos for control. Nolan stepped closer slowly. You think Rebecca actually matters to me? He muttered bitterly. You think any of this was worth destroying my career? Martha's stomach twisted. Not because of the cruelty, because she suddenly realized something horrifying. He genuinely didn't understand what he'd done emotionally. To Nolan, this was now about reputation management, not heartbreak, not betrayal, exposure. The house phone rang suddenly. Neither moved. It rang again. Finally, Martha answered quietly. Yes. A pause. Then her expression shifted slightly. I understand. Thank you for informing me. She hung up. Nolan watched her carefully. What was that? Martha looked at him calmly. Your board placed you on temporary administrative leave. All the color drained from his face. No. They're launching an internal investigation. That's impossible. Martha almost pitied him. Almost. Because powerful men always believed institutions would protect them forever. Until suddenly they didn't. Nolan grabbed his phone, immediately dialing someone furiously. Straight to voicemail. Again. Voicemail. Again. This time he cursed violently under his breath. Martha watched quietly. Collapse looked uglier in real life than movies portrayed. Less dramatic. More pathetic. By noon, federal financial investigators officially contacted Daniel Brooks, requesting access to specific documentation tied to Nolan's corporate reimbursements. Daniel called immediately afterward. This is escalating faster than expected. Martha stood near the kitchen windows staring at snowfall outside. Am I in danger legally? No, Daniel answered quickly. Actually, your cooperation protects you. A pause. But Nolan's exposure is expanding. Expanding. Interesting word. Like watching rot finally spread into visible places. Upstairs, Nolan shouted into another phone call. Martha closed her eyes briefly. For years she feared his anger. Now it just sounded small. Later that afternoon, Diane Dixon arrived unannounced. Of course she did. The moment Martha opened the front door, Diane swept inside wearing oversized sunglasses and fury. You ruined him! No hello, no concern, just blame. Martha closed the door calmly behind her. Good afternoon to you too. Diane removed the sunglasses sharply. Do you have any idea what people are saying? Martha blinked slowly. He had children with another woman. And you exposed it publicly? There it was again. Appearance over morality. Always. Martha crossed her arms. Did you know Diane's silence lasted half a second too long? Martha felt ice move through her veins. Oh my God. Diane looked away immediately. It wasn't my place. The betrayal somehow deepened again. You knew. Martha. You watched me blame myself for infertility while he raised children somewhere else. Diane's expression hardened defensively. Nolan was unhappy. Martha actually laughed then, a sharp, disbelieving laugh. That's your defense. You stopped being a wife years ago. There it is. Martha nodded slowly. Women always become responsible for male cruelty eventually, Diane scoffed. You wealthy women love victimhood. Wealthy women. As if money canceled pain, as if betrayal respected tax brackets. Upstairs, footsteps sounded suddenly. Nolan appeared halfway down the staircase, looking exhausted and furious. Mom, not now. Diane turned toward him immediately. What have you done interesting? Even Diane sounded afraid now, not for Martha, for status, for image, for the family name. Nolan rubbed both hands through his hair aggressively. I can fix this. Martha almost smiled. That sentence alone proved he still didn't understand. There was no fixing exposure once truth escaped publicly. Rebecca had already moved out of the apartment Nolan financed. Daniel secured emergency asset restrictions. Corporate investigators were reviewing expense trails. And somewhere inside all that chaos, Martha felt something unfamiliar beginning quietly. Peace. Tiny. Fragile, but real. Because for the first time in years, she no longer woke up trying to earn love from someone emotionally incapable of giving it honestly. Nolan looked toward her suddenly. You think this ends well for you? The threat hung coldly in the room. Martha met his gaze evenly. I think it already ended badly for you. His face darkened instantly. Then his phone rang again. This time he answered immediately. Silence filled the room while Nolan listened. And slowly, his expression changed. Fear. Real fear. What do you mean, federal review? He whispered. Martha looked away toward the snow falling softly beyond the windows. Karma rarely arrived dramatically. Sometimes it arrived as paperwork. The courtroom smelled like old paper polished wood and ruined reputations. Martha sat beside Daniel Brooks in a charcoal gray suit that made her feel less like a grieving wife and more like a woman finally reclaiming ownership of her own life. Across the aisle, Nolan refused to look at her. That almost hurt. Almost. Once upon a time, Martha would have done anything to keep Nolan's attention on her. She would have mistaken eye contact for intimacy, silence for temporary distance, neglect for stress. Now she understood something brutal. A starving woman will call crumbs a feast if she forgets what nourishment feels like. Nolan sat beside his legal team, looking exhausted beneath the harsh courtroom lighting. Gone were the perfectly tailored public appearances and effortless confidence. Scandal had aged him quickly. His company remained under federal review. Several board members resigned publicly. Investors distanced themselves. News outlets continued dissecting the charity gala footage like cultural evidence of corporate narcissism. And today, everything became official. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Martha inhaled slowly while the hearing began. This wasn't just divorce anymore. This was exposure under oath. Daniel leaned toward her quietly. You okay? Martha nodded once. Yes. And surprisingly, she meant it. Not because she wasn't hurting, because she finally stopped fighting reality. Across the room, Nolan's attorney, a polished woman named Cynthia Vale, opened aggressively. Your Honor, my client acknowledges marital failures. However, we intend to demonstrate emotional instability and manipulative escalation initiated by Mrs. Dixon. Daniel stood immediately. Objection. Counsel is attempting narrative framing before establishing evidentiary basis. The judge nodded sharply, sustained. Martha almost smiled. Nolan glanced briefly toward Cynthia with visible irritation. Good. Let him lose control slowly. Daniel rose calmly. Your Honor, this case involves extensive financial concealment, marital asset misuse, fraudulent transfer concerns, and documented deception spanning nearly a decade. The courtroom shifted subtly. Even legal professionals reacted differently once fraud entered conversation. Not emotional scandal anymore. Financial misconduct. Dangerous territory. Daniel continued smoothly. We will demonstrate that Mr. Dixon maintained a second household funded partially through marital resources while simultaneously constructing legal groundwork portraying Mrs. Dixon as emotionally incompetent in anticipation of eventual exposure. Nolan's jaw tightened visibly. Martha watched him carefully. For the first time in their marriage, he looked vulnerable. Not emotionally vulnerable, socially vulnerable. Men like Nolan rarely feared hurting people, but they feared losing status. Daniel called Evelyn Carter first. Evelyn walked calmly toward the witness stand, carrying years of quiet guilt across her shoulders. After swearing in, she adjusted her glasses carefully. Daniel approached. Please state your relationship to the Dixon family. I managed tax and financial portfolio structures connected to Mr. and Mrs. Dixon for approximately 16 years. And during those 16 years, did you observe irregularities? Yes. Nolan's attorney objected immediately. Vague. Daniel nodded slightly. Let's clarify then. He began walking Evelyn carefully through the records. Hidden transfers, layered accounts, apartment financing, duplicate reporting structures. Every answer tightened the room further. Martha noticed several reporters scribbling rapidly now. Nolan kept staring downward, not ashamed, calculating, always calculating. Daniel held up a document. Can you identify this? Evelyn nodded. A transfer authorization tied partially to Mrs. Dixon's inheritance portfolio. And where were those funds directed? Evelyn hesitated briefly. A residential property occupied by Rebecca Hayes and her children. Silence hit the courtroom hard. Even now, hearing it aloud still felt unreal. Nolan's attorney stood quickly. Mrs. Carter, are you suggesting criminal intent? Evelyn answered carefully. I'm suggesting concealment patterns inconsistent with ethical disclosure. That sentence landed like a knife. Corporate language, controlled, devastating. Next came Rebecca. Martha watched her walk toward the witness stand wearing a navy suit with tired eyes and steady hands. Strong, much stronger than Nolan ever expected her to become. Rebecca sat down slowly. Daniel approached gently. Miss Hayes, did you believe Mr. Dixon was legally separated? Yes. And what led you to believe that he told me repeatedly his marriage was over? Rebecca's voice cracked slightly. But it wasn't. No. Daniel nodded carefully. Did Mr. Dixon ever discuss Mrs. Dixon negatively? Rebecca looked down briefly. Yes. What specifically? Nolan stiffened immediately. Rebecca inhaled slowly. He said Martha was emotionally unstable. Her eyes flickered briefly towards Martha apologetically. He said she depended on him financially and couldn't handle divorce. Martha felt something strange hearing it publicly. Not pain, validation. Because abusers relied on secrecy. Truth weakened them. Daniel continued. Did you eventually begin documenting interactions with Mr. Dixon? Yes. Why, Rebecca laughed softly without humor. Because eventually lies stopped matching each other. God, that line hung in the courtroom beautifully. Eventually lies stopped matching each other. Rebecca described the recordings, the timelines, the manipulation. And slowly, piece by piece, Nolan's carefully engineered double life transformed from scandal into documented pattern. Then came the moment Martha never expected. Diane Dixon took the stand. Nolan looked genuinely alarmed for the first time all day. His mother adjusted her pearls nervously while swearing in. Daniel approached quietly. "Mrs. Dixon, when did you become aware of Rebecca Hayes?" Diane froze. The courtroom went still. Nolan whispered sharply, "Mom." The judge immediately looked up. "Mr. Dixon, another interruption and I'll remove you." Silence again. Diane swallowed visibly. "I knew. A few years ago." Martha felt ice spread slowly through her body. A few years. All those dinners. All those fertility comments. All those humiliations. And Diane knew. Daniel remained calm. "You knew your son maintained another family?" Diane looked cornered now. "It wasn't my business." "Did you ever inform Martha Dixon no? Did you ever discourage Nolan from using marital resources to support that household?" Diane hesitated too long. The courtroom noticed. Martha noticed. Daniel noticed. Nolan closed his eyes briefly like a man watching his empire collapse brick by brick. "Mrs. Dixon," Daniel said carefully, "did you assist your son in concealing financial transfers?" Nolan stood violently. "Objection." The judge slammed the gavel instantly. "Sit down, Mr. Dixon." Nolan looked furious now, panicked, unraveling. Diane's face had gone completely pale. "I only signed paperwork he asked me to sign. There it was, the final fracture." Martha stared at Diane in disbelief. "You signed paperwork?" While sitting across dinner tables blaming Martha for the emotional decay Nolan himself caused. Daniel walked slowly back toward the center of the courtroom. No further questions. Silence spread again. Heavy, humiliating, permanent. Nolan's attorney attempted recovery afterwards. Stress, emotional confusion, marital complexity. But the narrative no longer worked. Too much documentation, too many witnesses, too many contradictions. Eventually, manipulation drowned beneath evidence. During recess, Martha stood near the courtroom windows alone, watching snow fall softly outside. Nolan approached carefully behind her. "You enjoying this?" His voice sounded raw now, damaged. Martha didn't turn around immediately. "No!" He laughed bitterly. "You destroyed my life!" Finally, Martha faced him, and for the first time since she met him at 23 years old, she saw him clearly. Not powerful, not brilliant, just emotionally hollow. "You destroyed your life," she said quietly. "I just stopped protecting the lie." Nolan stared at her silently. Then something unexpected happened. His anger faded briefly, and underneath it, for one tiny second, Martha saw shame. Real shame. Too late, but real. "You know what the worst part is?" Nolan whispered. Martha waited. "You were the only person who ever actually loved me before I became successful." The sentence nearly broke her, because somewhere deep beneath all this ruin, that part had once been true. Martha swallowed carefully. "Then you should have protected that instead of feeding your ego with strangers." Nolan looked away first. Not her. For once in his life, not her. 6 months later, Martha Dixon no longer woke up afraid. That was the first thing she noticed about healing. Not happiness, not excitement, peace. Quiet, ordinary peace. The kind that entered a room slowly after chaos finally exhausted itself. Morning sunlight poured through the oversized windows of her new downtown office, while Chicago moved below in silver and gold beneath early spring skies. The space smelled faintly of coffee-fresh paint and expensive paper folders. Everything here belonged to her. Not Nolan, not their marriage. Her. Martha stood near the conference table adjusting framed certifications along the wall while movers unpacked the final boxes. One plaque rested separately near the front desk. Martha Dixon Consulting Financial Recovery and Advocacy Services. Underneath, helping women rebuild after financial and emotional betrayal. Sometimes the sign still made her emotional, not because she built a company, because she rebuilt herself. Her assistant walked in carrying coffee. "Your 10 o'clock is here." Martha smiled softly. Already apparently word travels fast. It did. After the courtroom hearings, hundreds of women contacted Martha privately. Women hiding secret debt, hidden affairs, financial manipulation, emotional abuse wrapped inside luxury lifestyles. Some rich, some barely surviving, different bank accounts. Same pain. At first, Martha answered messages simply because she understood humiliation too well to ignore it. Then, gradually, purpose replaced survival. Daniel Brooks helped structure the consultancy legally. Evelyn Carter quietly referred clients needing financial tracing assistance. And Rebecca became something Martha never expected. Not her best friend, not family, something stranger. A woman who survived the same storm from a different window. Rebecca entered the office carrying 2 coffees and a stack of nursing textbooks against her chest. "You forgot breakfast again," she said immediately. Martha smiled faintly. "I've been busy. You say that every day now." Rebecca looked healthier lately. Lighter. Nursing school suited her differently this time because she no longer built her future around Nolan's promises. She built it around herself. The difference showed everywhere. Martha accepted the coffee gratefully. "How's clinical rotation?" Rebecca groaned dramatically. "I saw bodily fluids this morning no human being should ever witness." Martha laughed. Actually laughed. The sound startled both of them briefly. Because laughter once felt impossible, Rebecca leaned against the desk quietly afterward. "You know," she said softly, "this office is kind of amazing." Martha looked around slowly. Warm, neutral walls, natural light, fresh flowers near the lobby, no tension, no walking on eggshells, no waiting for someone else's moods to determine the emotional climate. Yes, amazing. "You saved me," Rebecca admitted suddenly. Martha turned immediately. "No, you did." Rebecca's eyes softened. "If you hadn't exposed him publicly, I would have spent years believing his lies." Martha swallowed carefully. "You helped save me too." And that was true, because Rebecca's existence forced Martha to confront reality instead of romanticizing it. Sometimes healing arrived disguised as devastation. A knock interrupted them. Their first client stood nervously near the doorway, clutching a folder against her chest. Martha immediately recognized the expression, ashamed, confused, terrified of sounding dramatic, the exact expression Martha wore during her first meeting with Daniel Brooks. Martha smiled gently. "Come in." As the woman sat down trembling, Martha noticed something painful and familiar. Wedding rings. Always the rings. "My husband says I'm overreacting," the woman whispered quietly. Martha leaned back slowly and suddenly understood exactly why this work mattered. Because emotionally manipulative men survived through isolation, through convincing women their instincts were irrational, through making betrayal sound like sensitivity. "You're not overreacting," Martha said calmly. The woman burst into tears instantly. Martha didn't interrupt, didn't rush her, because sometimes the first stage of healing was simply hearing another woman confirm, "You are not crazy." Later that afternoon, after meetings ended, Martha remained alone inside the office organizing documents when her assistant appeared again hesitantly. "There's someone here asking for you." Martha frowned slightly. "Who?" The assistant looked uncomfortable. He didn't give a name. Something inside Martha already knew. She walked slowly toward the reception area. And there he was, Nolan Dixon. For one strange second, Martha barely recognized him. The expensive confidence was gone. No tailored power suit. No polished arrogance. He looked thinner now, tired, older. His eyes carried the hollow exhaustion of a man who finally understood consequences weren't temporary inconveniences. Martha remained still near the hallway entrance. "What are you doing here?" Nolan looked around the office quietly. You built all this. Not admiration, disbelief. Like he genuinely never imagined Martha capable of existing successfully without him. "That surprises you?" she asked calmly. He looked ashamed for a moment. Yes. The honesty almost hurt more than cruelty. Martha crossed her arms. "You can't just show up here. I know." Silence settled between them. Strange silence. Not romantic. Not hopeful. Just two people standing inside the wreckage of what they once were. Nolan looked toward the sign near reception again, helping women rebuild after financial and emotional betrayal. A bitter smile touched his face briefly. "That's about me. Yes. You made me a warning label." Martha studied him carefully. "No," she said softly. "You did that yourself." He nodded slightly. "Fair enough." Outside the office windows, sunset painted Chicago in pale gold. Nolan finally looked back at her. "I lost almost everything." Martha stayed quiet, because consequences did not erase damage. "They sold my shares," he admitted quietly. "Most of my accounts are frozen until the investigation closes." He laughed bitterly. "My own mother won't answer my calls half the time anymore." Interesting. Diane abandoned loyalty quickly once status disappeared. Martha felt no satisfaction hearing it, just distance. Nolan stepped closer carefully. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness." "No," Martha answered honestly. "You don't." That hurt him. "Good. But I need you to know something." His voice lowered slightly. "I never meant to destroy you." Martha stared at him and finally understood the deepest truth about Nolan Dixon. He genuinely believed harm only counted if intention existed, but selfishness destroyed people regardless of intention. "That's the problem," Martha said quietly. "You never thought beyond your own needs long enough to see what you were doing to everyone else." Nolan looked down briefly. For once he had no defense prepared, no manipulation, no narrative, just failure. "I thought success would fix whatever was empty inside me," he admitted softly. Martha felt unexpected sadness move through her chest then, because once upon a time she would have spent years trying to heal that emptiness for him. Now she finally understood. Some wounds belong to the person carrying them, not the woman loving them. Nolan looked around the office one last time. "You seem happy." Martha thought carefully before answering. "Peaceful," she corrected softly. "There's a difference." He nodded slowly, and somehow that moment felt more final than the divorce papers ever had. Because for the first time, Nolan truly saw her, not as support, not as emotional labor, not as permanent forgiveness waiting patiently at home, but as a woman who survived him and no longer needed him to feel whole. Before leaving, Nolan paused near the doorway. "Can we talk again sometime?" Martha looked at him calmly, then toward the life she rebuilt from the ashes he created, and finally back at the man who once convinced her love meant endurance. "No," she answered gently, and this time, walking away didn't hurt at all. 1 year after the rooftop scandal, Martha Dixon stood barefoot on the balcony of her downtown apartment watching sunrise spill gold across Lake Michigan. Chicago looked softer in the early mornings, less aggressive, less loud. The city stretched beneath pale spring light while coffee warmed her hands and silence wrapped around her gently instead of painfully. That difference still amazed her sometimes. Silence used to mean loneliness. Now it meant peace. Inside the apartment, soft jazz played near the kitchen while fresh flowers sat beside open design sketches spread across the dining table. Martha had slowly returned to interior design again, not because she needed money, but because she finally remembered she once loved creating beautiful spaces before survival consumed her identity. Healing, she learned, was not becoming someone new. It was returning to the parts of yourself trauma forced into hiding. Her phone buzzed softly against the balcony table. "Rebecca?" Martha smiled faintly before answering. "You're awake early." Rebecca laughed through the speaker. "I have hospital rounds in an hour. Some of us save lives for a living. You say that like financial consulting isn't heroic. It's heroic for rich divorced women." Martha laughed quietly. That still felt strange sometimes, too. Joy without guilt. Rebecca continued warmly, "By the way, Ethan made honor roll." Martha's chest softened instantly. "That's amazing. He wants to show you his science project later. Tell him I'm expecting greatness." After hanging up, Martha stood quietly for another moment, staring across the water. A year ago, hearing Rebecca's name would have shattered her. Now, it reminded her how strange life could become after truth rearranged everything. Rebecca eventually finished nursing school. The children stabilized. The lawsuits settled. The federal investigation against Nolan ended in devastating financial penalties and permanent professional disgrace, though he avoided prison through negotiated cooperation agreements. Not victory. Not escape either. Just consequences. Real ones. Martha no longer followed updates about him closely. That surprised people most. They expected obsession, bitterness, endless hatred. But healing made revenge feel exhausting eventually. Because once you rebuild yourself, you stop centering the person who broke you. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Martha opened the apartment door expecting a delivery. Instead, Nolan stood there. For a moment, neither spoke. He looked different again, not just older. Quieter. Like life finally forced humility into places arrogance once occupied. He held no flowers, no gifts, no manipulative grand gesture. Just himself. Maybe for the first time, honestly. "Martha," he said softly. She remained calm. "What are you doing here? I know you said no more conversations. You came anyway." He nodded once. "I needed to see you one last time." Something about his voice felt different. Not persuasive, not performative. Human. Martha stepped aside silently. Nolan entered carefully, like a man walking through sacred ruins. His eyes moved slowly across the apartment. The design sketches, the books, the sunlight. Her life. "You made this place feel like you," he said quietly. Martha crossed her arms loosely. "I forgot I was allowed to." He looked down briefly. That sentence hurt him. Good. They sat across from each other near the windows while morning light filled the apartment softly. For a while, neither spoke. Finally, Nolan broke the silence. "I started therapy." Martha raised an eyebrow slightly. "I didn't know therapists accepted narcissists." A small laugh escaped him unexpectedly. "I probably deserved that." Probably. Interesting word choice. Martha studied him carefully. This wasn't the Nolan she married, but it also wasn't the man she exposed publicly. This version looked stripped down, painfully aware. "I spent most of this year trying to understand why I destroyed everything he admitted quietly." Martha remained silent. Because explanations no longer interested her the way they once had. Nolan stared toward the skyline. You know what I realized? What? I loved being needed more than I loved actually loving people. The honesty stunned her, not because it fixed anything, because it was real. Nolan rubbed his hands together slowly. When I met Rebecca, I felt admired again. His eyes lowered. When I came home to you, I felt safe. He swallowed carefully, and instead of choosing one life honestly, I kept feeding both because I couldn't stand feeling empty. Martha listened quietly. No rage left now. Just understanding. Not forgiveness. Understanding. Which was somehow sadder. You know what the tragedy is? She asked softly. Nolan looked at her. You had someone willing to love you through absolutely anything. Her eyes held his steadily. And you treated that loyalty like an unlimited resource instead of a gift. His face tightened painfully. I know. Martha believed him. Too late. But true. Nolan looked around the apartment again slowly. You seem lighter. I am. That answer came easily. Because she was. Not because pain disappeared. Because she stopped carrying someone else's emotional dysfunction like it was her responsibility to heal. Nolan's eyes softened slightly. I used to think you'd never leave me. Martha smiled faintly. So did I. That silence afterward felt strangely beautiful, not romantic, not tragic, just honest. Finally honest. Nolan leaned back quietly. There's something I need to say before I go. Martha waited. I did love you. The words hung gently between them. A year ago, they would have destroyed her. Now, they simply sounded incomplete. Martha tilted her head slightly. I know. Nolan looked surprised. You do, yes. She smiled sadly. But love without respect becomes possession eventually. That landed deeply. She saw it in his eyes. Martha continued softly. You loved me the way some people love houses. Her voice stayed calm. Something comforting to return to. Something stable. Something that would still be there no matter how badly you behaved elsewhere. Nolan looked away first. Again. You deserved better than me. For years, hearing those words would have made Martha rush to reassure him. Now she simply nodded. Yes, she answered honestly. No cruelty, no hesitation, just truth. And strangely, that truth healed both of them more than comforting lies ever could. Nolan stood slowly near the doorway a few minutes later. So this is really goodbye. Martha looked at him one final time. At the man she once built her entire identity around, the man who broke her heart, the man whose betrayal accidentally forced her to finally choose herself. Yes, she said softly. He nodded, then paused. Martha, what? Nolan's eyes filled briefly with something that looked painfully close to regret. You were the best thing that ever happened to me. Martha felt tears sting unexpectedly, not from longing, from closure, because for the first time, he finally understood her value after losing access to it. And that realization belonged to him now, not her. Martha smiled gently. I know. Then she opened the door. And Nolan Dixon walked out of her life forever. Martha stood quietly afterward, listening to the silence settle through the apartment once more. But this silence no longer sounded empty. It sounded free. Slowly she walked back toward the balcony where sunlight now flooded the city completely. The future stretched ahead of her wide open. No manipulation, no performance, no shrinking, just peace. And for the first time in years, Martha realized she wasn't surviving anymore. She was finally living. Sometimes the most painful betrayal in life is not discovering that someone lied to you. It's discovering how long you abandoned yourself trying to keep that person comfortable. Martha's story reminds us that loyalty is beautiful, but loyalty without boundaries can slowly become self-destruction. Too many people stay in relationships where they are constantly shrinking, apologizing, sacrificing, forgiving, and waiting, believing that love means enduring pain in silence. But real love should never require you to disappear in order for someone else to feel powerful. The hardest truth is that manipulators rarely look cruel in the beginning. They often look charming, successful, attentive, even loving. And when someone spends years making you question your instincts, your worth, or your sanity, you eventually start blaming yourself for wounds they created. That is why emotional awakening is so powerful. The moment a person finally sees the truth clearly, everything changes. What made Martha strong was not revenge. It was her decision to stop begging for honesty from someone committed to deception. It was the moment she realized her value did not decrease simply because someone failed to appreciate it. And maybe that is the real lesson here. A kind heart is not weakness. Forgiveness is not surrender. And walking away from betrayal is not failure. Sometimes losing the relationship is exactly how you save yourself. In the end, Nolan lost everything he spent years trying to protect, because lies eventually collapse under their own weight. But Martha gained something far more valuable than revenge: peace, self-respect, freedom, and the courage to choose herself again. If this story touched you emotionally, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever experienced betrayal, emotional manipulation, or a moment that forced you to rediscover your worth? Your story may help someone else feel less alone. And if you enjoy deep emotional drama stories about healing, betrayal, karma, and strong women rebuilding their lives, don't forget to subscribe and stay with us for the next story. Sometimes fiction heals parts of us real-life struggles to reach.